I was gonna say
Go
I'm
ahead.
just eating dinner, so I'm just gonna be off video or off, yeah, video for a little bit.
No problem. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I'll take a motion for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Thanks from John. You have a second?
I'll second.
All right, second from Brian. All in favor of the agenda as described, I'll say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
And any opposed? Okay, very good. So in terms of the comments, I don't have any comments. I think people probably saw from Kirby a note. There are a couple things you could follow up directly with him, but if there's anything that we need to talk about specifically, Ariane, there was a note in there about a bridge article. I remember the conversation. I don't really remember the exact all the things that were going to be involved in that article, but do you need any help, Ariane, with anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were gonna write or try to write an article about the suggested zoning changes in the CNU report. Is that right? And not all of them, just the one about more density, I think.
Yeah, that does ring a bell. Yeah.
So it's on my to-do list, and I'm happy to, I was really just offering to start the process. I think whatever I write will likely need a lot of editing, but just to get the ball rolling. I haven't done it yet, but I can do it this week.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think we could take two approaches to that. One is I also know we're going to be doing our zoning. We'll be discussing that a little bit later on. We were talking about having a zoning meeting.
Yeah.
To have some outreach on before we go to public hearing to say, hey, here are the changes we're going to be suggesting, and try to get some public input and public support for some of those changes. So that also could be another opportunity to tie those two together to say, the CNU report was talking about this, and we've got a couple of options, and here's what we're suggesting, but we want to hear from you.
Okay, great. So when we get to that place in the agenda, maybe if we're able to put dates on the calendar, then that would give us an idea of when we need to have some drafts done, because obviously we'd like that to hit the bridge before, with enough notice that people can read it, take a look at it, and then know that there's an engagement meeting coming up. So we'll focus on that a little bit longer. And then the other note was, hi, Maria. The other note was just about having somebody to come in and talk about housing. And I vaguely remember the conversation, but I don't really remember exactly what that was to do. But if there are things, Maria, that you can just go back directly to Kirby on that. Okay, let's take a look and see if there's any members of the public. Okay, seeing none, I guess we'll move on to the first agenda item. So Mike, what's the best way to go through these storyboards? Do you want to share your screen and just pull some things up?
Yeah, let me grab that real quick. There. So there was a couple of options. Trying to remember, I wasn't here for the meeting. You guys kind of went through these. But it actually looks like transportation, you guys actually started. Maybe that's the one.
Yeah, I remember going through a couple of them. Kirby had marked them up a little bit, and we had a discussion. And then I think the way we left it was that if people wanted to do any more editing, they could jump on between meetings and do that.
Yeah, because you guys did
looks
housing.
like we have some comments.
Yeah, you guys did housing, and I forwarded that on to SE Group so they could start building out that web page. And Kirby said you guys had halfway done through, I think it was transportation, so this is kind of where things were at. I'm not sure how you guys went through it. Usually Kirby has done a pretty complete review of these.
Well, Maria, you've got a comment in there. Do you remember how far we got? Was that from our meeting that night that you had put that in there about the walking and biking? I just don't remember.
No, I don't think we even got to transportation that night.
Okay,
We
so
just
this
did
is,
housing.
Oh, it's just housing? Okay. Because he had mentioned in an email, I'd asked him where we got to, and he said we got through housing and half of the next one. And
Okay.
I didn't see comments in any of the other ones except for this one, so.
No, I put the comments in before the meeting.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, we can go through these. If everyone remembers last time, the boxes are kind of cutting out the major sections that they work on. So the introduction is just that opening paragraph. Before we go into the plan and context, which are the maps.
Yes, I mean, my issue with the first sentence, I think it's been amended now. Before it didn't include walking and biking. It just went straight to driving, finding parking. So I thought, walking and biking should be explicitly stated, but it still doesn't say anything about transit, which is surprising to me. So I think that could be included. Like, people do take transit. It's a critical part of a transportation network.
Well, it
Is
looks
that
like
something we
Kirby
want
has-
to, oh, I was just gonna say, is that something we want to work on now? Is that something you want me to just work in afterwards?
Well, it looks like Kirby has a comment there that includes public transportation. His alternative, is that?
Mhm.
That
I think
looks
that
like,
was for a different
was
section.
that for different? No, you're right. You're right. Planning context. Getting it.
Well, it looks like, yeah, it looks like it was attached to this second sentence here, the decisions we make as a city. He wanted to change that to this plan moves the city forward to environmental sustainability and improved quality of life by supporting walking, biking, public transportation, and personal vehicles as a viable form of transportation.
Yeah,
That sounds
Like-
good.
I like that.
any other comments on that top part?
Comment about the walking, biking dichotomy.
Well, I think right now it's Kirby's rewrite. I like that phrasing a lot better.
Oh, it solves it better. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was, I mean, the sentence as is was kind of like creating this, either or thing between sustainable transportation and non-sustainable transportation, which I thought was unnecessary.
No, I agree. All right, so planning context is where we get into the maps.
Mike, can you just continue? I gotta get a pair of reading glasses. I'll be right back.
Okay. So it looks like they, SE Group kind of pulled out that the city of Montpelier has made continuous improvements to its transportation system in recent years. These improvements have expanded car-free transportation options in the city. And then they're trying to outline which maps to use. So it looks like they're gonna try to get a major one that just kind of highlights the network, highlighting the transit center, the SIBO and AB shared use path, which is actually the technical name of the bike path.
I think we could take out the non-car statement in that first sentence and it would still be accurate. I think just saying expanded transportation options in the city is accurate.
I think that's good. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
That sounds good.
All right. So they're talking about the next set, they kind of get into complete streets. We actually have what's called the street typology map, which is probably a second map we would put in there. So they kind of want to have a, as you're going through the maps, the first one looks like it's kind of showing the complete network, where are the major roads, the bike networks, bike lanes, transit stops, parking garages in Montpelier. No parking garages. But the complete streets, we do have a complete street typology plan, which we can put in there. And then it looks like they're trying to emphasize some of the improvements in the future.
Maybe, so as it's, right now it says, in the future, our transportation system must do better to transition to electric vehicles. Maybe it should just be like support the transition to electric vehicles. The city itself isn't, I don't know, unless they're talking about transit and city vehicles, I think they're really supporting a transition to electric vehicles.
Better to yeah, I see what you're seeing. So this is talking about the transportation system, and really the transition to electric vehicles isn't about the transportation system per se.
Unless they're talking about like city run transit and city vehicles. But I don't think that's what they're talking about.
No, this was pulling from the chapters that we had written before. Really, we're trying to get at, there are a lot of things we do well. Some of the things that we're still lacking in, one is addressing the stormwater. So most of the stormwater that runs off of our streets goes into storm drains untreated into the rivers. And so we need to do a better job with that. And the other piece, big piece, is we need to start working on preparing for that transition to electric vehicles. And so that means more charging stations and those types of things. But I think that sentence does need to have some rewording to kind of get at that point. And I'll point this out for some of the newer folks. The transportation committee, when I was working with them on coming up with the transportation plan, there was a really big dichotomy between two groups. There was one group which was Montpelier needs to be transitioning us to electric vehicles and moving forward in that way. We're still all going to have cars, but they're going to be electric cars, and it's going to be better for the environment. The other group was, in 15 years, there aren't going to be any more cars, and we have to start preparing for a world that doesn't have cars. And that was a serious debate that was going on within that committee of we're only going to have public transportation, and it's not going to be private vehicles. So it really came down to a really big vote at the end to kind of decide we can't go for both. What's our vision? And the winning vision was, we're going to be working on transitioning to electric vehicles. And so that kind of changes the dynamics. That means, do we or don't we support, and this was at the same time as us building the parking garage, do we or don't we support building the parking garage? And part of the group was, no, we're not going to have cars. And the other part was, yes, and that parking garage should be fully built out so that way it could accommodate electric vehicles, which it was. It was going to have 50 electric charging stations in it when it was built. Of course, it didn't happen, but that's a different story. But that was a little bit of the background of where that piece came in, and why this actually is an important piece to have in there, is the fact that our plan is to transition to electric vehicles.
So, well, first I'm curious what that vote was. Like what proportion of people are imagining that there aren't going to be private cars?
It was closer than you'd think. I mean, it was a significant group. There's, it's many members of like Sustainable Montpelier. We need to be, it's e-bikes and electric scooters, and we need more bike lanes. And if we didn't have car lanes, we could have more bike lanes and more people would be able to bike. And I advised them, I didn't think that was going to have, I was like, it's your plan. You guys can make the recommendation. It'll eventually go to the planning commission. But my thought was, I don't think that really has legs to stand on once it gets beyond this committee. And a couple of folks agreed, as much as they would, like to see a world where we didn't have everybody driving around in personal vehicles. They simply felt the reality is that's what's going to happen and we should prepare for it.
Okay, so I think in that sentence, just saying supporting the transition to electric vehicles would be, to me, more accurate. That's what the city can do. The city can't enforce, like what.
I'm curious. I'm
We
curious,
can't
Mike,
force
so this
people to
was-
buy electric cars.
Right.
This was before you guys wrote that part before I was on the planning commission, and I'm just curious what the transportation system is going to do to solve the problem, address the problems caused by stormwater. Is there going to be some kind of tax or something that's going to be used to take treatment, or like what was the vision of that? What that would look like?
It does tie into this, the city is creating a stormwater utility now. They're in the process of doing that, so they can start managing the stormwater that comes off of the streets and the parking lots. So there is actually a process to go through. It also has a lot to do with how we build and reconstruct our streets. So actually Taylor Street was a demonstration project where the water, rather than the trees being simply just, tree cells, they're actually tied into the stormwater system. So it actually is where there's special soil and the water's filtered through the soil. So the storm, rather than sending the stormwater to a grate, it sends the stormwater to the tree well, and the water soaks into the tree well and goes down. And at the bottom of the tree well is the collection system. So the trees get to soak up as much of the rainwater as it can along the way. And some of that will still get into, and the soils that are in there also capture some of the pollutants along the way as well. So it's actually a different system for treating the stormwater in the downtown area. Because it's really hard in the downtown. Where would you filter all this water? Well, it gets filtered in these tree wells where there's engineered soil, and those roots can actually go under the sidewalk. And then there was actual discussions of having pervious pavement, and there is some pervious pavement on Taylor Street. So there are a number of demonstrations along Taylor Street when they rebuilt it to look at different treatments, including pervious pavement on the sidewalks. So that way the tree roots could be under those sidewalks, as well as a number of other ways of treating stormwater runoff. Now, in a heavy rain, some of it's still going to go down the storm drains, but the hope is that we capture more of it, treat more of it, so that way it reduces and gets more phosphorus loading.
Okay, fair, Mike, fair enough. That's a lot of detail. It sounds like DPW has a role.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we're saying.
Yeah, there's a
Okay,
big process to it, and there are lots of things that we're trying to do better.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
So synergies, this is looking at the comparisons to other plans. This Montpelier general transportation sector contributes 40% of all carbon emissions. I believe that's a general 40%. I don't know if we've got a specific amount, but Vermont, it's 40%.
So maybe that sentence could just be, in Vermont, the transportation sector contributes 40%. Be accurate. Oh, I just had a comment at the end of that paragraph. You know, going back to like complete streets.
Mhm.
So making that, not just making other forms of transport desirable, but making them safe and desirable. I think biking is currently desirable, but it's not as safe as it could be.
And that was actually a big finding of the Transportation Committee, was that was their big thing, was safe and desirable, and that biking and pedestrians should be treated on equal footing as automobiles. You know, a lot of times we have all the transportation funding goes to building roads, and then we have alternative transportation. And so they really wanted to not see biking and pedestrian as alternative, but as transportation modes. And I think this just ties to the main aspiration of the transportation chapter. Which just goes to the fact that the aspiration is that owning a car is not a requirement to live in Montpelier. You know, we're not requiring everyone to get rid of your cars, but you don't have to have a car to live in Montpelier. And that opens up a lot of possibilities for people who can't afford cars, people who have disabilities and can't drive. So that was their primary goal.
You don't need a car, but you have to have a parking space.
You do have to have a parking space unless you're in the downtown. We're working on that, John.
You know, and this is I mean, things have changed a lot since that research was done, right? Like a lot of the state employees don't come in every day. Like, what are the needs in the downtown? You know, it's probably very different than when you guys looked at this a couple years ago. Any other, looks like Maria had some comments there.
I thought this sentence was kind of jumbled.
People use zoning to require. Yeah, it does kind of.
I mean, there's just assumption, like this sentence makes it seem as though like single use zoning districts require more parking spaces, but it's really because of the way that they're constructed that people want parking spaces. They don't.
Yeah, the single use, the key with the single use zoning districts is that you're basically required to have to drive to move between
Right.
working and home. So you have to have, because they're single use, you have to, there's very little opportunity to walk and drive between them because they're usually separated by so much distance. And usually the parking spaces then move everybody even farther apart.
Well, I mean,
But I do think it's worded funny.
So I kind of try to rewrite it. I mean, if there was good enough transit, it wouldn't require driving between, you know, like these are all decisions that we're making here. So I kind of try to rewrite it to, I don't know, rephrase that the need for more parking spaces. And that it requires driving. It doesn't require driving. A lot of other decisions that we're making make it driving more desirable than any other form of transportation. So, you know, like there's.
I'm good with Maria's rewording. Everybody else?
Yes.
All right, I'll make that change. I'll put that on the list.
I agree. You can delete the talented.
So this comment also goes back to like this age-old conflict between like, if we get rid of parking downtown, then, small businesses won't have any, will lose their customers. And so this idea of like that parking is required for patrons is, I think, inaccurate, especially in a town like Montpelier, where a lot of people just walk to our downtown, which is kind of the point of having a walkable downtown. So
Yeah, usually I can pull out why we wrote something. I'm trying to figure out why that was written that way.
well, I think there is this like assumption that like, well, parking is required for customers. Like we need to have parking in front of this storefront or else we will lose customers,
Yeah, usually for Montpelier, the big reason we need parking is the fact that we've got 6,000 more jobs than we have workers. So, but yes.
And then
Could this be more pointless? Yeah, I agree. This should be reworded. Whatever gets changed, this doesn't make a ton of sense.
I mean, does that sentence really add anything? I mean, of course, you're gonna need truck deliveries. I mean, is that really adding any information? Can we just delete the whole sentence?
Would it soften it up just to add in some and require some parking for patrons?
well, I mean, the tone of it, it is crucial to ensure that our transportation system accommodates these needs. It is setting it up as like,
Yeah.
this is crucial, this is needed and necessary for our economic strength as a city. And I it's like compared to like a lot of the other language in this section, it is very strongly worded, requiring parking. So I think we could say that we would like to ensure the transportation system accommodates industrial and commercial developments or, and their needs, kind of like balance it out a little bit with the needs of pedestrians and people living in the city.
What if we just took out the and require parking for patrons? I mean, our transportation system, it is critical to our industrial and commercial developments that they have the truck traffic. Crucial, our transportation accommodates these needs. We could just remove the parking part of it.
Yeah, I think just going straight to additionally, it's crucial to ensure that our transportation system accommodates our industrial and commercial developments and their transportation needs. Like, I don't think that it needs to be, I don't know. It's a little clunky.
Guess I gotta leave do have to leave the comma. So basically delete the blue and leave additionally it is crucial to ensure transportation accommodates commercial industrial needs. Look good?
Looks good to me. Maria, is that good?
I like that.
Everybody?
Yeah. Because I mean, that's what transportation is. It's like balancing all of these different needs in one place.
So it looks like there was a comment from Kirby on that, but looks like we've kind of captured that.
I'm not sure what if it was like rewritten already, or what this was referring to.
Yeah. What's this? Oh, must have been part I deleted. Yeah. All right, so then we've got the goals and aspirations. We have just one aspiration and a handful of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 goals. You had a question on the appearance, improve the appearance of the Montpelier's transportation amenities for non-vehicular travelers.
I feel like there's a history here.
There is, yeah. So a lot of our streetscapes and everything really got dumbed down with the automobile because people drive so fast that you don't get to appreciate the details of buildings, and no sense putting out flower boxes along the side of a highway. So a lot of our transportation system, if we're going to start to shift towards more bike and pedestrian, and like the transportation committee likes to point out, everybody is a pedestrian at some point. Even if you're just driving your car to the parking lot, you're going to walk from the parking lot to the building. You're eventually a pedestrian. And it's important to have that streetscape and those transportation infrastructure be more attractive and not be, just another bridge and just another sidewalk. So that's what that was trying to get at, is to try to engage and get more art involved, get things more animated, I guess. And so that's why we actually have we have transportation infrastructure committee and a complete streets committee. And I think complete streets is the one that is trying to look at those types of things. So, the painting on Heaney lot and the different artwork that's been going in, that's all goes to making a better transportation system.
Okay. Is the goal language locked in? Is that
It's
was
pulled from the implementation plan. So these are what's in the implementation plan.
I just like your phrasing better. I feel like I always say this in meetings, but I would say like improve Montpelier streetscape. Like you kind of nailed it when you were describing it.
Well, we'll try to remember that.
I was like, are potholes ugly? Like I didn't really understand what the point of it was. But like,
no, it goes to why do we spend a little bit more on, granite curbs as opposed to concrete curbs? And it's just little things that go in. But we will get another stab at the goals and the strategies. And when we do, we'll have to come back and touch on them here. Now the implementation is publicly owned, which means we can do a lot through city policies. Okay, so it looks like Kirby made a word switch in there, which is fine. And that's pretty much what was in there. It just grabs up what were the various strategies we had. So yeah, I will add in the who's involved. I'm also going to have to add in those two committees. said we've got a transportation infrastructure committee and a complete streets committee. Which was an improvement. When I got here, we used to have 4 transportation committees. And that was, we had a bike committee, a pedestrian committee, the transportation committee, and the parking committee. And they all worked separately. So it's nice to have that. Down to 2.
All right, well, that looks good, right, everybody? So everybody happy?
Yeah.
So Mike, I think we look at the next one.
All right, if you guys still want to jump in and do one more, I will.
I think we got time for one more. Is it marked up like that, or do we need to do some more homework?
That one has one comment from Kirby. Let me see if the other one has anything. Yeah, I'm not seeing as many comments on those. I don't know if we want to hold off.
Do people want to have a couple weeks to review that? Make some comments on it?
That's the only comment. There's some stuff in here from Kirby, but other than that one, looks like it really hasn't had a lot of review.
What do folks think?
So I reviewed it, but I don't know natural resources as well as I know transportation. Like that's, so it's harder to pick things
Well,
apart if it's not your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so
Why don't
generally,
we take a look at it?
what was that, Gabe?
I said, let's go. I mean, it's not very long. Let's just take a look at it.
Okay, so generally for folks who aren't familiar with this, natural resources is it was developed with the Conservation Commission. So usually when we're talking natural resources, it can go everything from, geology and soils to water resources and natural communities. So it's a wide range of topics that it kind of can get into. It can get into air quality and stuff like that. But most of the focus was in Montpelier has kind of been around the natural community side. We've done a lot of the Conservation Commission did a lot of work on mapping all the natural communities and identifying rare species, rare communities. And then they also did a lot with vernal pools and wetlands. So you'll kind of see there'll probably be a lot of that in here.
We did, you know what, you guys, we did talk about this last time. And I just looked back at the minutes. It says we did talk about it. It says there were not a lot of comments on this section, is what the minutes say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I also remember us getting stuck on that paragraph that's shaded.
Yeah. And then at some point Kirby is like, let's fold our tent. I just hit the wall. So I don't know if that was during,
Exactly.
I don't know if that was during this or not, but we hit some wall.
Yeah, this language looks very different than anything I would have written. So either you guys or Kirby changed it or SE Group took a few liberties because this is not the way I usually write things.
I think it was SE Group.
However, water quality and thoughtful land conservation are critical priorities for the community.
Yeah, I think this is where Kirby got stuck right here.
So I think the one thing we were trying to do in developing the natural resources plan was to try to start to work, although they're both in the same department, we have a Conservation Commission and we have a Parks Commission. And so one of the things we were trying to do was to help get them to start thinking about, identifying in the Conservation Commission the areas that should be conserved or preserved, and then trying to work with the Parks Commission about making sure that these areas get either easements or the city prioritizes those in purchasing into future parks. And they do have a natural resources inventory, and that's what it references here. And the vernal pools, and that's what I was telling you about. And these things need protection. So this is a little bit of the Conservation Commission starting to talk about what needs protection. So that way we can start working in the implementation later on about talking about working with the parks to get those areas protected. Resources. So we've got a number of things we do need to map. There are a lot of things. I mean, this chapter could have a lot. This is where the maps go in the planning context. There could be a lot of maps that go in here. And I'll have to work with SC Group on identifying which ones to narrow it down to. I know we'd have the natural communities maps. I know we have to have the forest block map because that's a requirement under state law now to show how our forest blocks connect outside to these other areas. And we have some actually large forest blocks because especially as you are looking at the western side, they tend to connect into large forest blocks that are in Middlesex. So we'll have to get those mapped.
So going back to that first paragraph that we were all kind of like tossing around last time. I still don't necessarily understand the point of the livelihoods of most Montpelier rights aren't tied directly to the land and water. I don't know that that needs to be said. What if it was just today very little of Montpelier is managed forest land or farmland, period. Water quality and thoughtful land conservation are critical priorities for the community. Like, I don't think it needs to go into like, even though we don't rely on the land for our jobs, we still care about water quality. Like, I don't think that's how it currently reads to me, which I think is kind of like creating a weird, like, of course we care about water quality, even if our jobs aren't tied to the land.
I agree. I like that. I don't know what other folks think.
I'm generally a
I
fan
think
of
I think
deleting
it's
as
fine.
much as possible.
Take it out.
All right. So what was it again, Maria? You had it
Just like
worded.
putting a period after farmland, period. And then deleting everything up to water quality.
All right. So, oh, today very little of Montpelier is managed forest land or farmland. Ah, got it. Period. The land. And so what was the next? Oh, just take that out to the period.
I think so. I'm not sure whether to keep the however in there or not.
Well, that could be a comma and
Or how about water quality and thoughtful land conservation remain critical priorities for the community?
I like that.
Still care.
and land conservation remain.
Yeah, critical. Yeah, pick out the R. There you go.
Priorities for the community.
And take out the however too, Brian, or keep it in?
I don't know. That's. Oh, it's a.
I
I
would
think
take,
that one big sentence gonna be. I mean, you could just make that one sentence. But, and put a but instead of however. Talk about we can go to John's comment, we'll make it a very efficient.
I don't see that being a but. That's my, like, even though it's not managed forest land, we can still care about water quality. It's not like a,
Oh yeah, it could just be an and, could be an and.
are other people seeing what I'm seeing?
I think it could be an and. I'm remembering now Kirby was gonna talk about compact downtown, but we still care about the natural whatever, but I think this is straightforward, simple.
Oh, that's
Truly
right.
about
That
the
was fun.
inventory.
That like we have,
I think you just do that. Just that's good.
Yeah.
Right. Just get rid of the however or but.
but
You
yeah,
guys think that's okay?
Kirby had this whole thesis that like Montpelier decided to be a dense city in order to preserve the farmland and forest land elsewhere in Vermont. That was,
Yeah, that is actually one of our key features. Now that I see where he was going with this, and I'm trying to think about how to word it. Hate to use the word we. I don't want to use Montpelier again. I can just write it. Then we can adjust it. It's not going to be right. Yeah, how to get that all to fit into a coherent sentence. Very little. I don't know. I'd have to play with stuff for a little while. I usually sit there with a yellow pad and blast it over, but I think that's where he was trying to go, and he's right. That is one of our key features that we always talk about. For example, Act 250 talks about protection of ag soils, and we expressly say in our zoning and in our planning, we don't protect ag soils in Montpelier. It's not what we do. If we can accommodate more growth, this is where it should be, because this is the most walkable, most bikeable area. And if that means building on some ag soils, that's okay, because what we want to do is to accommodate the growth, so that way places like East Montpelier and Barrytown and Middlesex can have places that can remain agriculture and rural.
how about saying something like by preserving its density or preserving its compact city development, Montpelier can help support or can help protect the rural countryside, something like that.
I think it actually is. The more that we talk about it, I think it's a pretty important idea, what you just said, Mike, right? Like that's the whole thesis behind all of our density discussions. So you could, I mean, Kirby might want to stab at it. Maria could put in what she just said. Maybe we could just tell Kirby that we left it there for him to take a look at. Unless you really want to get this to him right away, Mike.
No, we've got transportation. We've moved one forward to SE group. I was just trying to think, what if up top here, because I'm trying to put together a coherent paragraph. So if we were talking about, today very little is managed forest land, forest, farm and forest land. I was thinking, while at the same time, water quality and thoughtful land conservation remain critical priorities for the community.
How about moving the sentence that you just wrote up into between those, between farmland and water quality? I think maybe to explain why Montpelier has very little managed forest land. Is that kind of where what you're thinking?
No, well, it's not what I was thinking, but because I was just trying to go and get the context going, while at the same time water quality, land conservation remain priorities.
I think what Maria said is actually pretty good. If we move that to the front, because we're not really talking about density here, we're really talking about natural resources, right? So if you move that to the front and then it flows.
Move this to be the first sentence.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
that
yeah.
should be the first sentence.
It may still need some word tweaking, but it's there.
I think you might be able to put a semicolon after growth and then get rid of today.
Well, doesn't SE group kind of like take some liberties? That it's like we can wordsmith a whole bunch, but they tend to have a little bit of license, right?
Yeah, they're trying to get out of taking license because they did a bunch of that and then kind of got some pushback. So that's why they wanted the words, as much
Okay,
of the words
gotcha.
to kind of be here, so that way they could feel comfortable knowing they can go forward with it. Yeah, if you want, I can try to work on that. A little bit more till my brain clicks into. Because really what we're trying to say is,
I think it's pretty good, Mike. We can just take a look at it again next time. If you want to fool around with it a little bit.
and I'll just put that in for now and. That's pretty close to what we had approved before when we talked about the synergies. Yeah, they had a lot of goals.
Everybody good with that? And we can bring it back up for, oh, there's another paragraph. Sorry.
Yeah, talks about the Conservation Commission and the Parks Commission, so that's good.
So we'll look at it again next time. So, you know, if you get a couple weeks, if you want to look at it some more, that'll be in there. Okay, Mike, so I think are you the one going to provide a summary on S100? That looks like the state, the legislature did a bunch of stuff we were already talking about.
Yeah, so this is the Home Act. I just want to give everyone an update. I did put something in the weekly report on Friday, but I wanted to just go and address it with you guys. When I put it on the agenda, I hadn't finished reviewing it. And it turns out, so S100 is the Home Act. It's a lot of changes. But at the end of the day, the changes that go into effect on June 30th or July 1st, whichever date it is, we already meet all those standards. So we already have all those requirements met. So that part is good. The next piece, the second half of the rest of the bill goes into effect on December 2024. So 18 months from now. So we still have to go through and do a bunch of reviews of what will go into effect next year. But occasionally we've had a lot of calls in the planning department, well, maybe half dozen calls at the planning department from people who said, hey, the Home Act is in effect. What can I do now? Pretty much the answer is whatever you could do in the past, which is actually a lot. We have a lot of development potential, you know, so if people have ideas, we're trying to encourage them to come in, but most of what was in the bill for July 1st was you had to allow duplexes anywhere you allow single family dwellings, which we already do. We put that in, and you have to allow up to 4 units, depending on how you read the new rules, which whatever, but it doesn't really matter because you have to allow up to quadplexes anywhere you have sewer and water. We already do that. And we also allow them all as permitted uses as quadplexes everywhere. So we already meet the rule. The way it was written was really bad, and I won't go into that. But regardless, we meet the rule anyway. So I'm not too worried about that. So that's the big update. So if somebody does for some reason knows you're on the planning commission and wants to know what we're doing, the answer is we don't have to do anything at this time to meet the rules.
So that's interesting. I read it. That wasn't the way I interpreted it, but I'd love to chat about the quadplex because we talked about that as a change that we were proposing with this next revision. So if you went into like, what's our smallest, I know there's no density requirements in the downtown, but what is it? 1,500? Is that the smallest lot size outside of downtown?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you had a 1,500, you know, R 1,500, you could put a quad in there already?
No. So according to our attorneys, the interpretation is you have to allow them in those areas, but it doesn't exempt them from density requirements. What we've been talking about for our zoning update, one of our 4 options, which maybe, you know, it may be more than one that we pick. We're going to kind of have that a la carte discussion. One is not having any density requirement if you're within the design review district. So if you're in design review, you don't have to meet density requirements. Another one was we already allow single, if you're in a conforming lot, you can have a duplex regardless of the density. And we talked about making that 4 units regardless of density. The state law does not say regardless of density. So the state law just says if you're in an area with sewer and water, you have to allow it, but it doesn't.
That's the legal opinion because it doesn't say regardless of density. Oh, there's gonna be legal challenges on that one.
Yeah,
Any
actually
questions?
it's worded a lot worse than that. So there's a lot of questions about that one, but yeah.
Yeah. Any questions for Mike on the legislation?
Well, I'm just curious, what are the things that we'll have to work on for December 2024?
One piece that it will impact for our conversations, whether we put it in this year's zoning amendments, or whether we wait till next year for the zoning amendments, is going to involve the Town Hill neighborhood. Remember, well, most of you weren't there. John will remember it. Kirby would remember it. We did the Town Hill neighborhood pushed back really hard on the zoning changes. And so they ended up being zoned residential 24,000, which is a little more than a half an acre. Didn't meet the 90% rule, didn't do anything. We just, from a political reason, had to just go and say, there you go. You guys are, that's what city council basically ended up doing. The new S100, one of the provisions going into effect next fall or next winter in December is everybody with sewer and water with any area, it actually says district, they're going to probably go through and fix that, with both sewer and water must allow 5 units per acre. So they're setting that as the minimum density. So obviously all of our other zoning districts, Res 9,000 on down, all meet that requirement already. And actually Res 9, I've got to go and look at that maybe, or so we might have to lower that one a little bit. So we may have some discussion of having to lower Res 9 a little bit. But again, some of our discussions that we're having, if we say, as Gabe was mentioning, if you've got a conforming single family lot, you can have 4 units. Well, that meets that 5 units an acre requirement. So we just have to go through and see how to meet it with Res 9, but Res 24 is going to have a lot of discussion. How does that end up coming into compliance? And it may be just they get forced into it. It may be something where we've got to make a proposal that says we're going to rezone these guys Res 8,500 because that's what it has to be. And I'd have to grab my calculator to see exactly what 5 units an acre. It's going to be right around in that area because 43,560 divided by 5 is going to be somewhere in there, 8,000 and change. So.
Any other questions
That
for
will be a
Mike?
question.
I saw it looked like there were a lot of compliance and reporting requirements. I didn't read those sections very closely. I don't know if that, does that fall on the city? Is that more staff time and staff work or no?
Mostly state, those are state reports. Rather than make decisions, this legislative session was all about reports. So the Department of Housing and Community Development will have a lot of reports to write.
Okay, if nothing else for Mike on this, anything else? Thanks, Mike, for the overview. So Mike, if you, I know that we had, so we've got the stuff from the AARP and New Urbanism report, and then you had some other provisions and other things that were going to be recommended. Do we want to, are we able to put dates on a calendar so then we can walk that back and talk about the public engagement, or are we still too far out?
I think it'd be helpful if we start to put some dates down, to think about when we want to do it, because it'll, I think if we don't start thinking about some dates, we're going to start, it just is going to keep rolling. And I know we've got 2 sets of stuff we've been talking about. One is this start to have a public meeting before we go to public hearings on the zoning. And then we've also talked about starting to have those public meetings on the city plan storyboards. So
that's true. Yeah.
My thought was I do want to start, and I've been pushing SE Group to say that we would want to start to have those meetings, by the end of, I've said publicly July, I wanted to start having these. So if we could get in by the end of July for those, that would be good. So maybe if we were thinking about a public meeting on the zoning in the first meeting of July, and then the zoning for the second meeting of July. Neither one of these is a public hearing. These are just public meetings. We're gonna warn them. We've got a new public information officer. Well, she's been here. Evelyn has been working for us for a year part-time. She goes full-time in July. And she's gonna help me roll this stuff out, but I'm gonna need more time to get ready for the city plan stuff.
So these are the outreach meetings, not the hearings.
These are not the hearings. I just, last time we did zoning changes, one of the things people kind of beat us up on was, well, you never came and asked us what we thought before you just put these things to public hearing. So we're like, okay. So I thought what we would do, because we might not have every line in the strikeout ready to go. I'm working with my staff. I've got all those technical changes done. I've got a strikeout copy, that's all done. Within my office, we are trying to nail down some final language for demolition. We want to fix the demolition clauses. We've had a number of people who've said it's too easy to demolish buildings in the Montpelier, and therefore people are going to demolish buildings and build these big boxes with flat roofs. So I figure if we help come up with new demolition rules, that may help abate that argument. We also need to update our stormwater rules. That's just a technical thing that our DPW crew and us are working on. And we also need to do some work on some sign rules. So within my office, we're working on some of those technical pieces, but we don't have to go to the public to talk about those. What we want to get from the public is, here are all the things that we're working on from a housing standpoint. What do you guys, what do you, the public, think? Is this, which ones? Because we were talking about an a la carte. We got a bunch of things. We could do the no density in the design review district. That's an option. Everyone who's got a single family home can put in a quadplex regardless of density. That's a second option. I've talked about maybe double the density. So, you know, you may be in res 6,000, but you can have 1 unit per 3,000. We already do that for single family homes. But this would allow triplexes and quadplexes to incrementally come in. Obviously, you would either do the thing Gabe talked about, the 4 units, or you double the density. You probably wouldn't do both, but we'll see which one kind of comes out as a better option or a more palatable option. The idea being, if we can't get rid of density, we can move density to the point where it becomes more irrelevant. It really doesn't become a barrier, but it's still there. So people who are worried about density, well, it's still there. There's still a density limit, but it's just not there. But we've got a couple of proposals. Remember, we're going to make these changes to the use table. So like multifamily split into 2 groups. So there's 5 to 14 and 15 and up. So that way we've got more things there. We're going to make some changes to congregate living. So that way we don't discriminate against congregate living as much as we do now. Right now it's a single line. We'll break it into 3 or 4 lines depending on the size. So that way, so we've got a bunch of things we can talk about with housing and density related issues. And it'll also give a platform for the public to talk about, you know, we're not doing enough, or maybe we should do this, or have we considered that? It'll give them an opportunity to talk before we finalize the plan and go to public hearings in, well, wouldn't be till August, obviously, if we've got another meeting in July.
Okay, so if we did that we're looking at July 10th would be the public meeting. So I'm trying to remember the bridge publication schedule. Does anybody know when that one issue that goes everywhere, what day? That's a Wednesday, right?
I don't know, there's one out in the hallway, which I could grab, which has a date on it. We could add 2 weeks to it to see where that is.
It just seems like if we want to get a letter out encouraging people to come out and look at some of these ideas, then, you know, we're coming up on probably wanting to have that out.
Yeah, let me grab, I can see what the date was on that one.
And Ariane, you said you'd have time to work on that letter, an initial draft this week.
Yeah, does anyone have or maybe it's in the notes I haven't looked at, just thinking about the suite of housing options. I didn't take good notes on that last time, but anyway, I can get us started. But if anyone has good notes, they can send them my way.
So this one is labeled June 7th to 27th. So looks like it's a 3-week edition. So I think we would have to start letting them know early that we want to put something in, then they would probably need it in. See if I got my calendar.
So July 5th, it would be in the July 5th issue. And then we'd have the hearing would be the next Monday. And there's other ways we can get that out, right? I mean, what are the other ways the city tends to communicate on issues like that?
Yeah, well, like I said, we've got our new public information officer, so we have the website, we've got Front Porch Forum, we've got Facebook. So they do a much better job now than in the past of having a coordinated public outreach.
So Mike, could you send to Ariane? I can't remember which meeting we had. We had a meeting where we talked about the CNU piece, and then you also went through some of the menu of items. You know, we're probably not going to include every single thing, but at least to give some examples, she's going to write the first draft of the bridge article. You know, and then we could at least have like, okay, here are some things that we're thinking about. We'd love some public input on. Did you find which minutes kind of capture that? I remember there was 1 week where they were pretty good. It was pretty detailed.
Yeah, I'll try to track that down.
Okay, so so then I guess if we get that and we have it shared somewhere, we could all look at that on the 26th of June, right? Just be comfortable with what's going out, and then we'd want to get it in the hands of the bridge pretty quickly. And I imagine, I don't know that the city will say exactly the same thing as the planning commission, but I imagine it would be pretty close. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, well, whatever you guys put together, they'll put it out in your name if they want. If you know,
Okay.
if you guys are wanting to put something out, they'll say the planning commission wants you to know this.
Does that sound like a good plan? We'll get a first draft and then we'll have time to take a look at it on the 26th. Okay, great. Okay, Mike, is there anything else on that we need to talk about? I mean, I like the idea of the public information sessions. I do think, you know, like, I don't really know what that looks like. So I think we'll need some coaching, and should we bring in the public information officer to talk about what that might look like?
Usually, I think what I would be envisioning for this zoning one is, and we may be thinking about having this as an in-person meeting. We'll probably have a Zoom option for people as well. So, I mean, if you can't make it, but it's sometimes helpful to have this more in person, but it's a new world now. So I'm not sure exactly how it would work, but there certainly would be a public comment. But usually what happens is I would kick things off with a quick PowerPoint, an explanation of what we're doing, and you know, then laying out what we're trying to get from them. You know, we want to hear from you on whatever's up, but these are the things we're thinking about doing. We think these are the next steps. And we want to know what you think about our ideas. Are there ones you like? Are there ones you don't like? And we really want to hear what you think, because we're going to be putting together a draft, and we're going to be bringing zoning amendments to go to public hearing in August or early September. And we really want to know, before we put pen to paper, what do you guys think? And that's pretty much, and then we just leave it open and we hear from them. For folks who
It's just like an open mic night.
Yeah, and for folks who haven't gone through this before, a lot of times it's a lot of just sitting and listening and taking notes. We sometimes ask comments, but we've tried not to get into discussions or debates with people. It's really about giving people the floor and hearing what they have to say, and thanking them for their comments and thanking them for their input, because it's important. But we do try to kind of keep a little bit out of, even when we give our public hearing on it, we may explain why we did something, but we try to avoid kind of arguing with the public. We try to, these are their opportunity to provide input.
What do you think it looks like 2 weeks later for the city plan? Because that's a little bit more like people almost need to have really reviewed it before they show up, right?
Yeah, and that one, I'll be really under the gun to make sure we're ready for that one. And hopefully we don't have to push it to August, but if we have to, I'm gonna try to set things up to get there. It really will absolutely be in person, and we might be moving it to a different location. I don't know how many people are gonna show up, so, sometimes we would do these at the senior center where we've got a little bit more room. We used to do them upstairs. I've had some of these upstairs in Lost Nation Theater. That's a little tougher space to get out of Lost Nation Theater. But we may talk about venue, but the idea is, again, giving a presentation, giving a kickoff of what's the big process to the city plan that we've been working on since 2018. Try to give them the broad definition of what we've been doing and what we're working on. And then start to narrow it down to, we have 5 chapters or 4 chapters, whatever it is that we want to start getting input on. This is just public meetings. These aren't public hearings. And then have 5 different stations set up with 5 different computers, and people can just rotate from one to another, and we can show what the storyboard looks like. And then beside it, this is my vision of what it would look like. Beside it, we've got, an easel or something that has a printout of the implementation strategies. So people understand we've got the storyboard, then we have our goals and strategies. And this is what the goals and strategies look like. And we want to hear from people. Sometimes we'll set them up.
So this sounds like a big production from the planning staff, right? That's what that sounds like.
Yeah, but you
What's our
guys,
role
you
and
guys
what's
are
our
the
role?
ears.
Listening?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
guys
we're
are the ears
listening.
though.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to know what we needed to do. So it sounds like you guys have both of those things, and we're just going to be on hand to listen, get feedback and be prepared for adjustments.
Yeah, you guys are gonna have to hear what public has to say and then start to make decisions of, we bit off too much. We bit off more than we could chew on that proposal. Maybe we should back it off, which we did that with design review. We heard from the public, we pulled that back. Different places in some places we've gotten push from the public that said, no, I don't think you guys are doing enough. And I think that's another option. So we hear from the public, and eventually we're going to come up with a proposal that we'll put into a public hearing. But that will be much farther for the city plan. That's much farther down the road. This first one is 5 of the chapters, and then hopefully by September or October, we have the other 5 or 6 chapters, and then we're ready to go at the end of the year to start having the actual public hearings, because the public has seen all 11 chapters at that point. And we've reviewed their public comments, and we say, I think we feel comfortable going to public hearing. Let's go to public hearing and start the process. And then,
Do you think we should include that in this letter, the date of July 24th, or is it just too early that we should do a second communication if we're going to do it then?
yeah, I wouldn't confuse the zoning update with the city plan update.
Okay.
I would stick to the one, which is we're doing the zoning revisions. And
Very good. So does that make sense to everybody? We'll look at the letter for next week and with an eye towards the 10th of July, and then we'll follow Mike's guidance as to whether we're ready for the city plan the following meeting or not. Is there any questions for Mike or?
I just had a comment about I'm not sure how you typically word this, but I like the idea of calling it like a zoning listening session, to get across that we are here to listen to what the community wants, as opposed to, us presenting our lofty ideas to them and then having pushback probably immediately, but if it's phrased as we're here to listen, this is what we thought, what do you think? I think maybe it sets off a different tone.
That's great. That's great, Maria. Thank you.
yeah, I do. I think that would be helpful. And I think the fact that we have all been talking about this as kind of an a la carte, we haven't decided what our final thing is. And I think that's a good time for us to go to the public and say, hey, we haven't made a decision, but we've done this in 2018 and 19 and 20, and we've heard from the public. What do you guys think if we did this? Or we could do it this way, or we could do it this way. We really haven't, what would you guys like us to follow up on? And hopefully we get some amount of input.
Are there any lessons learned, Mike, from how you guys have done the engagements on the Elks Club property that, in terms of getting the word out, getting better feedback, getting better participation, or?
A lot of that is the result of Evelyn. Bringing Evelyn on part-time, and most of her part-time work was organizing those community outreach sessions. So she's a tremendous asset because she's got all the connections to all the different outlets for getting this information out. And she also monitors it. So she keeps an eye out, which I don't have the time or don't do, is, actually reading the Front Porch Forum posts. And when people come up and make a comment, then she's like, oh, I've got to respond to that person to make sure they understand this. Or I'll have to have Mike or Meredith come back with a reply so we can make sure that this comment that was put on Facebook will have a good response to. And so
we got the right
team.
we got the right team member, is what you're telling us.
Yeah, in the past, it used to just be, every department up to themselves, and, I'm not on the Facebook and Front Porch Forum, so I'm not connecting with folks at that level. So they try to, her job is really to hit as many people and in many places as we can. So that way, as best we can, not have people say, I didn't know. If I knew about it, I would have said something, but I didn't know about it.
Right. Very good. Any other comments for Mike, or thoughts about the engagement? Okay, if somebody wanted to move to approve the minutes from our last meeting, I would take that motion. You guys want to take a minute if you haven't looked at them yet?
I did just look at them, so I will move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second to Ariane's motion?
Sure, I'll second it.
We got a second. Marie, you look like you're still reading. Yeah, let's give you a minute.
Oh, sorry.
John, are you good? So all in favor of approving the minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. I'll take a motion to adjourn unless there's some other comments or questions that Mike has, or for Mike or anyone else.
So moved.
We have a second?
I'll second.
All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.